The applause was a physical thing, a wave of sound that washed over Ilara Vance and felt like a drowning. It was meant for the man standing on the stage, basking in the warm, golden light. Marcus Thorne. He had his hand raised, a gesture of magnanimous humility that he had practiced in the mirror. She knew because she had watched him do it, his face contorting into a mask of contrived gratitude. From the floor of the grand ballroom, inside the Vesper Tower she had bled for, Ilara watched him accept the Architect of the Year award for a building he had not designed. He had not drawn a single line. He had not solved a single structural puzzle. He had not spent a single sleepless night wrestling with the impossible physics of its cantilevered spire. She had done all of that. The emerald gown she wore felt like a costume for a part she no longer wanted to play. It was beautiful, a swathe of silk that clung and flowed in all the right places, a color Marcus had chosen because he said it made her eyes look like jewels. He liked his possessions to be beautiful. The dress was another entry in his ledger of ownership. She felt the weight of it, the same way she felt the weight of the last 5 years. It was a pressure that had settled deep in her bones, a quiet exhaustion that had become her constant companion. She smiled, a small, precise movement of her lips that did not reach her eyes. She had perfected that smile. It was the armor she wore in a world that only saw her as an accessory. Marcus's voice, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system she had helped specify, filled the cavernous space. "I couldn't have done it without my team," he said, his voice rich with false modesty. "And, of course, without the unwavering support of my brilliant partner, Ilara." He gestured toward her table, and a spotlight swung, catching her in its invasive glare. The applause swelled again, this time directed at her. It felt even worse. It was applause for her supporting role, for being the silent, beautiful woman behind the great man. They were clapping for a ghost. She did not stand. She did not wave. She simply inclined her head, the smile fixed in place, and waited for the light to move away. It felt like an eternity. In that bright, hot circle of manufactured adoration, she made a final, cold decision. It was a decision that had been forming for months, a tiny crack in the foundation of her life that had slowly widened until the entire structure was compromised. Tonight, it would come down. When the awards ceremony concluded, the ballroom dissolved into a sea of champagne flutes and networking. Music, a low thrum of sophisticated jazz, seeped back into the air. Marcus, surrounded by a crowd of admirers and investors, was in his element. He was a sun, and they were all planets caught in his orbit. Ilara remained at their table, a still point in the swirling chaos. She traced the rim of her untouched water glass, the condensation cold against her fingertip. She was calculating, not angles or load-bearing capacities, but escape routes, the logistics of disentangling a life. Her apartment was in his name. Her car was leased through his company. Her name was on the firm's masthead, but not on its bank accounts. He had built a cage of convenience and luxury around her, and she had only just realized the bars were made of steel. She thought about the digital files on her private server, the ones with metadata time-stamped years before Marcus had ever announced the Vesper project. She thought about the original hand-drawn sketches she kept in a locked folio under her bed. She thought about the silence she had kept, the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but heavy, the kind that settles like dust, covering everything until the original color is forgotten. She had allowed him to paint his name over her masterpiece, and her silence had been the primer. "There you are." His voice cut through her thoughts, sharp and proprietary. Marcus stood before her, his face flushed with victory and champagne. He was not looking at her, but through her, his eyes already scanning the room for his next conquest, his next handshake. "People are asking where you are. You need to be circulating. It looks bad if you're just sitting here." "I'm tired, Marcus," she said. Her voice was quiet, but clear. His focus snapped to her, his smile tightening. It was a subtle shift, one that only she, who had studied his moods like a seismologist studies fault lines, would notice. "Tired? We just won the biggest award of our careers. This is the celebration. Don't be difficult, Ilara." Your career, she corrected, her voice still low. You won the award. He laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. Oh, here we go? Is that what this is about? You want a little more of the credit? I gave you a shout-out on stage. What more do you want? He glanced around, lowering his voice to a hiss. Do not do this here. Do you understand me? You are embarrassing me. I want to go home, she said. Fine, we'll go. Let me just say goodbye to the investors from Seoul. They're the ones funding the Keystone Initiative. He was already turning away, dismissing her. No, she said. The word was small, but it stopped him. He turned back slowly, his handsome face clouding over with genuine confusion, then darkening into anger. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate, a version that would never say no. What did you just say to me? I am going home, she repeated, rising from her chair. The emerald silk whispered around her legs. My home. Not the apartment. I'm leaving Marcus. For a moment he looked utterly lost. His brain, so adept at schmoozing and taking credit, couldn't process the input. Then the arrogance returned, a sneer twisting his lips. Leaving? Don't be ridiculous. You're having a moment. You're emotional. Give it 3 days. You'll be begging to come back when you realize your keycard doesn't work. She started to walk away from the table, toward the grand glass doors that led to the lobby. She could feel the stares of people nearby, their conversations faltering. The air was thick with their curiosity. He caught up to her in 3 long strides, his hand clamping down on her arm. It was not a gentle touch. It was a vice. We are not done here, he growled, his grip tightening. You have an obligation. Let go of my arm, Marcus. Her voice did not waver. It was cold, clear, and devoid of the fear he expected. All the fear had been burned out of her over the years, leaving behind something hard and unyielding. You are making a scene, he seethed, pulling her closer, trying to drag her toward a less conspicuous alcove. His fingers dug into the delicate skin of her bicep. The pain was sharp, a bright spark in the dull ache of her exhaustion. She did not scream. She did not struggle. She simply stopped walking and looked at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. His perfectly tailored suit, his expensive watch, his award-winning smile now a contorted mask of rage. She saw him, in that moment, for exactly what he was, a hollow man, a performer whose show was finally closing. And it was in that moment of stark, terrifying clarity that a new voice entered the tableau. It was not loud. It was not angry. It was a low, calm baritone, steady as iron wrapped in silk. Take your hand off of her. The words cut through the ambient noise of the gala like a razor. They were not a request. They were a statement of fact, a declaration of an event that was about to occur. The conversations nearby did not just falter, they stopped. The music seemed to hold its breath. Marcus froze, his head snapping toward the source of the voice. Standing a few feet away was a man who seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. He was dressed in a charcoal suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed a part of him. His stillness was absolute, a stark contrast to Marcus's coiled, frantic energy. He was not large, but he possessed a kind of density, a gravitational pull that bent the room around him. His face was composed, his dark eyes holding a look of profound, chilling patience. It was Jinwoo Kwon, the primary investor from Seoul, the man Marcus had been so desperate to impress. Marcus, still clutching Alara's arm, forced a laugh. It was a brittle, ugly sound. Mr. Kwon, just a small domestic disagreement. You know how women can be. He tried to regain his footing, to pull the situation back into the realm of things he could control. Jinwoo Kwon did not smile. He did not rush. He was not performing. His gaze shifted from Marcus's face to the hand clamped on Alara's arm, and his expression, if it was possible, grew even colder. It was the kind of cold that wasn't about the absence of heat, but the presence of something absolute. I will not ask you again, he said, his voice dropping even lower, yet carrying with impossible weight. Something in those quiet words, in the man's unblinking stare, finally penetrated Marcus's thick skull of arrogance. A flicker of real fear appeared in his eyes. He was a bully who had just run into a predator, and his instincts screamed at him that he was hopelessly outmatched. His fingers loosened, then fell away from Alara's arm as if it had been scorched. Alara rubbed the spot, a constellation of red marks already blooming on her skin. She looked at Jinwoo Kwon, and for the first time that night, perhaps for the first time in years, she felt something other than exhaustion or resignation. It was a disorienting, unfamiliar sensation. It was the feeling of being seen, not as an accessory, not as a possession, but as a person worthy of defense. Two men, dressed in identical dark suits, materialized behind Jinwoo Kwon. They moved with a liquid efficiency, without wasted motion. They hadn't been there a second ago, and now they were simply present, their posture relaxed, but radiating a quiet, professional menace. Jinwoo's eyes never left Marcus. "You have a choice," he said, his voice a calm murmur that was somehow more terrifying than any shout. "You can leave this building under your own power, or my associates can assist you. I assure you their methods are less comfortable." Marcus stared, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The performative confidence, the swagger he wore like a second skin, had evaporated, leaving behind a pale, sweating, terrified man. He looked from Jinwoo to his silent associates, then back to Alara, a desperate, pleading look in his eyes. He was looking for an ally, for the woman who had always smoothed things over, who had always managed his tantrums and protected him from the consequences of his own actions. He had not updated the file. She was not in it anymore. Alara met his gaze and gave him nothing, just a cool, level stare. That was his answer. With a strangled sob of humiliation and rage, Marcus turned and practically fled, pushing his way through the silent, staring crowd. He did not look back. The power vacuum he left behind was filled with a profound, heavy silence. The kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. Jinwoo Kwon's associates melted back into the shadows from which they had come. The jazz music timidly started up again. The murmur of conversation slowly returned, but it was different now, laced with speculation and awe. Jinwoo Kwon turned his attention to Alara. His expression softened, the glacial coldness in his eyes receding to reveal something else: concern, recognition. "Are you all right, Miss Vance?" he asked. She was struck by the fact that he knew her name. Not just Alara, the first name Marcus had used, but Miss Vance. A formal, respectful address. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. "I'm fine," she managed to say, her voice a little shaky. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving her feeling brittle and exposed. He nodded, his gaze dropping to the red marks on her arm. He did not comment on them, but she saw a flicker of something hard and dangerous pass through his eyes before being suppressed. "My car is waiting downstairs," he said. It was another statement of fact. "Allow me to see you home safely." "That isn't necessary," she began, the old habit of refusing help, of not being a burden, dying hard. "I believe it is," he countered gently, but with an unmistakable core of steel. "He is not a man who accepts rejection gracefully. Your apartment is no longer a safe place for you tonight." He knew. Of course he knew. A man like this, a man who moved with such quiet, structural power, did not operate on assumptions. He dealt in information. He had likely known more about her situation than she had understood herself. The realization was both terrifying and strangely comforting. She looked back at the glittering ballroom, at the life she was leaving in ashes. Then she looked at the calm, composed man in front of her, who offered not passion or pity, but safety. A port in a storm she had been weathering alone for far too long. "All right," she said, the word a quiet surrender. Not to him, but to the reality of her situation. For the first time, she was accepting help. "This way," he said, gesturing not toward the main lobby but to a private service elevator she hadn't even known existed. As she walked beside him, a strange sense of unreality descended. The world had tilted on its axis. The path she had been on had crumbled into dust, and a new one, uncertain and unnerving, had just been paved before her by a man who moved like he owned the ground beneath his feet. And as the elevator doors slid silently shut, sealing them in a small, quiet steel box, Elara Vance took her first breath of free air. It was sharp, cold, and tasted like the future. The ride down was silent. Elara was hyper-aware of everything: the subtle scent of expensive cologne and clean linen from the man beside her, the whisper of the elevator's descent, the cool metal of the handrail beneath her fingers. Jin-Woo Kwon did not speak. He simply stood, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, radiating a calm that felt like a shield. It was not an awkward silence. It was a deliberate one, a space he was giving her to breathe, to process. She was grateful for it. Her mind was a maelstrom of shock, fear, and a bewildering sense of relief. The elevator opened not into the bustling public lobby, but a stark, private parking garage. The air was cool and smelled of concrete and exhaust. A single black sedan, so polished it looked like a pool of liquid night, waited with its engine purring softly. A driver in a crisp uniform stepped out and opened the rear door without a word. "After you, Miss Vance," Jin-Woo said. She slid onto the plush leather seat. The interior of the car was like a sensory deprivation chamber, silencing the outside world completely. The door closed with a solid, reassuring thud. Jin-Woo entered from the other side, and the car pulled away smoothly, gliding up a ramp and into the glittering chaos of the city at night. The Vesper Tower, her tower, receded in the rearview mirror, its spire a silver needle against the dark sky. She did not look back. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice sounding small in the vast, quiet car. "A property of mine. It is secure," he replied, his gaze fixed on the stream of lights outside the window. "You can stay there for as long as you need. We will retrieve your personal effects from the apartment tomorrow. My people will handle it." "Your people," she repeated softly. It sounded so absolute. "You don't have to do this. I can go to a hotel. I have friends." He finally turned his head to look at her. His eyes, dark and intelligent, seemed to assess her with a disconcerting accuracy. "Marcus Thorne is a man of significant, if shallow, resources. He is also a man of immense pride. You have wounded that pride in a public forum. A hotel would be the first place he would look. Your friends could be put in a difficult, even dangerous position. This is not a matter of charity, Miss Vance. It is a matter of logistics." He framed it in terms she understood. Logistics. Strategy. It wasn't a handout, it was a tactical move. This reframing allowed a part of her, the proud, independent architect, to accept it. Still, a question lingered, sharp and insistent. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you doing this?" He was silent for a long moment, watching the city lights play across her face. "Because I invested $50 million in the Vesper Tower, not because of Marcus Thorne's sales pitch, but because of the elegance of the preliminary structural designs I reviewed." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Designs that were credited to an internal project lead. I had my team investigate who that lead was. They found the digital signatures on the raw CAD files. They found the metadata on every revision. All of it led to you." Elara stared at him, her heart starting to beat a little faster. He had not seen her as a pretty accessory at a gala. He had seen her work. He had seen the part of her that was most true, the part she had hidden away and allowed another to claim. "I do not invest in performers," Jin-Woo continued, his voice low and even. "I invest in architects. Marcus Thorne is a performer. You, Miss Vance, are an architect. A brilliant one. I have been following your work, your real work, for over a year. My investment was in you. Therefore, you are my asset. And I protect my assets." The words should have chilled her. Asset. It was another form of ownership. but the way he said it was different from how Marcus would have. For Marcus, an asset was something to be used, displayed, and drained of value. For Jinwoo Kwon, it was something to be protected, cultivated, and secured. It was the difference between a strip mine and a conservatory. The shock of his revelation, of being truly seen by someone of his caliber, was so profound it left her speechless. The car glided to a stop in front of a discreet, elegant pre-war building on a quiet, tree-lined street. There was no ostentatious gold signage, only a burnished bronze plaque with a name she didn't recognize. The doorman, a stoic man with the build of a retired boxer, simply nodded as they approached, holding the heavy glass door open for them. They rode another silent elevator, this one paneled in dark, rich mahogany, to the penthouse. He unlocked the door not with a key, but with a thumbprint scanner that glowed a soft white before clicking open. The apartment was breathtaking. It was a duplex with a soaring double-height living room encased in glass, offering a panoramic, godlike view of the city skyline. The furniture was minimalist and exquisite, each piece a work of art. There was no clutter, no personal photographs, only clean lines, rich textures, and a profound sense of peace. It was the kind of silence that has a presence. "This will be your space," he said, gesturing to the vast room. "The kitchen is stocked, the bedrooms are upstairs. My own residence is in a different part of the city. You will have complete privacy. A security detail is stationed discreetly in the building. No one will enter without your express permission." It was overwhelming. The generosity, the efficiency, the sheer scale of his protection. She walked toward the massive window drawn by the tapestry of lights below. Her tower was visible from here too, a proud silhouette against the bruised purple of the twilight sky. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. It was a complex cocktail of gratitude, fear, and a deep, soul-shaking weariness. "Rest, Miss Vance," he said from behind her. "Tomorrow, we can discuss the future." She heard his soft footsteps retreat, the quiet click of the door closing behind him. And then she was alone. Alone in a stranger's palace, with the city laid out at her feet. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window. For 5 years, she had been living in a cage with gilded bars, slowly suffocating. Now, the door had been blown off its hinges, but she found herself in another, larger, more luxurious cage. She was free from Marcus, but she was now under the protection of Jinwoo Kwon. A ward, a project, an asset, the thought chafed. She was not a damsel in distress. She was a survivor who had been planning her own escape. His intervention had been necessary, life-saving even, but it had also robbed her of the final act of her own liberation. She spent the first 24 hours in a state of suspended animation. She explored the cavernous apartment, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She showered in a bathroom clad in floor-to-ceiling marble, using soap that smelled of sandalwood and rain. She found a walk-in closet filled with new clothes in her size, simple, elegant pieces in shades of charcoal, navy, and cream. The efficiency of it was terrifying. His assistant had likely made a single phone call, and a wardrobe had materialized. She slept in a bed with sheets so soft they felt like water, and for the first time in years her sleep was not a shallow, anxious state, but a deep, dreamless plunge. The next afternoon, a woman with a severe black bob and an iPad knocked softly on the door. She introduced herself as Miss Choi, Mr. Kwon's executive assistant. She was polite, professional, and radiated a competence that was almost as intimidating as her boss's stillness. She oversaw a team of 2 men who packed the contents of Alara's old life into a series of neat, labeled boxes. They were done in under an hour. They brought everything: her books, her clothes, her drafting tools, and most importantly, the locked folio of sketches. Later that day, Jin-woo returned. He did not arrive unannounced. Miss Choi informed her an hour in advance that he would be arriving to discuss next steps. He found her in the living room, not gazing at the view, but with her folio of sketches spread across the wide glass coffee table. She was wearing a pair of the charcoal gray trousers and a cream silk blouse that had been provided for her. She had her hair pulled back, and her face, free of makeup, was pale but resolute. "Mr. Kwan," she said, her voice steady. She did not stand up. He paused, taking in the scene. He was not a man who missed details. He saw the sketches, the determined set of her jaw, the way she claimed the space as her own. A flicker of something, approval perhaps, passed through his eyes. "Miss Vance," he replied, his voice the same calm baritone. He took a seat in the armchair opposite her, not crowding her space. "I trust you are feeling more rested." "I am," she said, "and I am grateful for your hospitality. But we need to be clear about something." She met his gaze directly. "I am not your ward. I am not a project to be managed. I appreciate your protection, but I cannot trade one form of dependency for another." She expected him to be offended, or perhaps amused. Instead, he simply nodded, as if this was the conversation he had been waiting for. "I would be disappointed if you felt any other way," he said. "Dependency is a liability. I prefer my assets to be self-sufficient." There was that word again. Asset. This time, she challenged it. "I am not an asset, Mr. Kwan. I am a person." "You are," he agreed, without missing a beat. "You are also the most skilled architect in this city, specializing in tensile structures. That makes you an asset to anyone who wishes to build ambitious things. The terms are not mutually exclusive. One is a statement of your humanity, the other of your professional value. I am interested in both." His directness was disarming. He was not trying to flatter her or placate her. He was speaking to her as a peer. "Marcus has frozen my bank accounts," she stated, moving on. "He filed a notice this morning claiming that my leaving the firm constituted a breach of my employment contract." "I am aware," Jinwoo said. "My legal team is handling it. The contract is unenforceable. It contains clauses that are illegal in this state. It will be nullified by the end of the week." He said it with the casual certainty of a man ordering a coffee. "He's also preparing to file a suit against me for intellectual property theft," she added, her stomach clenching at the thought. "He's going to claim he designed the Vesper Tower." "Let him," Jinwoo said. His voice was calm, but there was a new, dangerous edge to it, a blade being quietly unsheathed. "He is walking into a trap of his own making. A public court case is the last thing he wants. It allows for discovery. It allows for the forensic analysis of server logs and design files. He is an arrogant man, but he is not a stupid one. He is doing this to intimidate you, to force you back under his control through legal threats." "It won't work," she said, her voice hard. "I know," he replied. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. "Which is why I have a proposition for you, Miss Vance. Not an offer of sanctuary, but a contract of employment. My corporation, Kwan Industries, is diversifying into urban development. We are spearheading the Keystone Initiative, the largest redevelopment project this city has seen in 50 years. I need a lead architect, someone with vision, with daring, someone who understands not just how to build a skyscraper, but how to build a legacy." He paused, his eyes holding hers. "I want you to be that architect. I am not offering you a job. I am offering you a blank canvas the size of a city block and an unlimited budget. Build something that will make the Vesper Tower look like a child's toy. You will have your own firm, fully funded by my company. Your name will be on the door. Your vision will be the only one that matters. All I ask for in return is a 20% stake in your company and the right of first refusal on all future projects." Alara was stunned into silence. It was an offer beyond her wildest dreams. It wasn't just a life raft. It was an entire fleet. It was a kingdom. It was a level of trust and professional validation she had never imagined possible. He was not just giving her a shield. He was giving her a sword, an arsenal. "Why?" she whispered, the question feeling inadequate to the scale of his offer. "Because," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "I do not like it when people steal. And I have found the best way to deal with a thief is not just to prove his guilt, but to build a monument to the person he robbed. A monument so large and so magnificent that it casts a shadow over everything he has ever touched." In his quiet, measured words, She heard the promise of a reckoning, not a loud, messy, emotional one, but a cold, precise, and total annihilation. He was going to help her destroy Marcus Thorne, not with brute force, but with the one thing Marcus had tried to steal, her own brilliance. She looked down at her sketches on the table, then back up at the man sitting opposite her, the quiet sovereign who had entered her life like a force of nature. She thought of the years of silence, of being diminished, of being a ghost in her own life, and she knew this was her chance to become solid again. "Okay," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I accept." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of Jinwoo Kwan's lips. It was the first one she had ever seen on him, and it transformed his face, hinting at a warmth hidden deep beneath the surface. "Good," he said. "Miss Choi will draw up the contracts. Welcome to Kwan Industries, Miss Vance." The days that followed were a blur of focused, exhilarating work. Ilara moved out of the temporary penthouse and into a permanent residence of her own choosing, a spacious loft in a converted warehouse district, which she paid for with the generous advance on her new salary. Jinwoo's lawyers had descended on Marcus's legal threats like a pack of wolves, and within a week, his claims had been systematically dismantled and dismissed. Her old bank accounts were unfrozen, but she barely touched them. She had new ones now, under the name of her new company, Vance Architecture. Jinwoo was true to his word. He gave her complete autonomy. He set up her offices in a sleek, modern building downtown and provided her with a budget to hire her own team. She poached the best and brightest junior designers from her old firm, young talents who had also been overlooked by Marcus and were fiercely loyal to her. For the first time, she was in a room where her voice was the most important one. The feeling was intoxicating. Her interactions with Jinwoo were sparse but significant. He would visit her new office once a week. He never came to inspect or to micromanage. He came to observe. He would stand silently at the back of the design studio, watching her work with her team, listening to the energetic flow of ideas. He would look at the models and the schematics, his dark eyes missing nothing. His presence was a quiet affirmation, a silent testament to his belief in her. They began having dinner once a week, always at a quiet, unassuming restaurant where they wouldn't be seen. These were not dates. They were strategy meetings, conversations between two high-level collaborators. She would talk about her vision for the Keystone Initiative, a multi-use complex that integrated green space, sustainable energy, and public art in a way the city had never seen. He would listen, his focus absolute, asking sharp, insightful questions that pushed her to think even bigger. In these quiet moments, she began to see the man behind the formidable reputation. She saw the dry wit that would surface in a wry, understated comment. She saw the deep appreciation he had for beauty, whether in a line of architecture or the flavor of a perfectly prepared dish. He spoke little of his past, but she pieced together a story of a young man who had inherited a traditional Korean conglomerate and ruthlessly modernized it, dragging it into the 21st century and multiplying its value tenfold. He had a reputation for being ruthless in business, a shark in a world of minnows. But with her, he was something else entirely, a patron, a mentor, a protector. One evening, he invited her to his family home for dinner. She was nervous. Meeting his family felt like a line being crossed, a shift from a professional relationship to something more personal. The home was not a sterile modern palace like the penthouse, but a sprawling, traditional estate in the hills outside the city, surrounded by meticulously manicured gardens and old stone walls. An older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and the same regal stillness as her son greeted them at the door. This was his mother, the matriarch of the Kwan family. She was dressed in a beautiful traditional hanbok, and her gaze was just as assessing as Jin Woo's. "So," she said, looking Ilara up and down, her voice laced with a faint Korean accent, "you are the architect. My son has not shut up about you for a year." Jinwoo looked momentarily flustered, a sight so rare it was almost comical. "Omoni," he said, a hint of pleading in his voice. His mother just smiled, a knowing, mischievous look in her eyes. She took Alara's hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "He said you were brilliant. He did not say you were beautiful. He is a foolish boy." She led Alara inside. "Come, you must be hungry. I made bulgogi." Dinner was a revelation. In the presence of his mother, Jinwoo was different. He was still quiet and composed, but there was a softness to him, a deference that was endearing. His mother, for her part, treated Alara not as a guest, but as an old friend. She asked about Alara's childhood, her parents, her dreams. She did not ask about Marcus. It was as if that part of Alara's life was a footnote she had no interest in reading. After dinner, as Jinwoo was speaking on the phone in his study, his mother found Alara admiring the garden from a moonlit veranda. "My son is a good man," she said, coming to stand beside her. "But he is not a simple man. He sees the world as a series of structures, of systems to be built or dismantled. He does not let many people into his life." She turned to Alara, her dark eyes soft. "He has been watching over you for a long time, little bird, long before you knew he existed. He saw you were in a cage, and he waited for you to be ready to fly before he opened the door." The words resonated deep within Alara, a protector who did not force a rescue, but waited for the moment his help would be an enablement, not a takeover. It was a profound form of respect. Meanwhile, Marcus Thorne's world was slowly, quietly imploding. He had lost the Keystone Initiative, a catastrophic blow to his company's finances and prestige. Rumors were circulating about his public humiliation at the gala. Old clients were becoming hesitant. New loans were mysteriously being denied. He was bleeding money and credibility, and he couldn't figure out why. From his gleaming corner office, which suddenly felt more like a prison, Marcus watched the news with a growing sense of panic. A business channel was running a segment on the city's most anticipated new development. And there she was, Ilara, standing on the construction site, wearing a hard hat, looking more confident and powerful than he had ever seen her. The chyron beneath her read, "Ilara Vance, Lead Architect, Keystone Initiative." Rage, pure and undiluted, surged through him. She had not come crawling back. She had soared. She had taken everything that should have been his. In his deluded mind, her success was a theft from him. Her brilliance was a resource he owned, and she had stolen it. His arrogance, which had always been his defining trait, now curdled into a desperate, reckless obsession. He couldn't accept that he had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered. He couldn't accept that Alara had not only survived without him, but was thriving. He saw Jinwoo Quan as a rival who had stolen his possession, not as a superior power he should fear. This fatal miscalculation led him to his final, desperate gambit. Ignoring the advice of his increasingly panicked lawyers, he filed the lawsuit. A massive, multi-million-dollar claim against Alara Vance and Vance Architecture for intellectual property theft. He held a press conference to announce it, standing before a gaggle of reporters, his face a mask of wronged virtue. "Miss Vance was a junior designer at my firm," he lied, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. "She used her position to steal proprietary designs, the very blueprints for the Vesper Tower, and has attempted to pass them off as her own to her new benefactor, Quan Industries. This is a story of betrayal, of a mentor being stabbed in the back by an ungrateful protege. We will see her in court." He thought it was a masterstroke. He believed the public accusation. The threat of a long, ugly legal battle would be enough to destroy her newfound credibility. He thought Quan would cut his losses and dump the now controversial architect. He imagined Alara, her reputation in tatters, finally having no choice but to come back to him, the only one who could fix it. He had no idea that he had just handed Jinwoo Quan the loaded gun he had been waiting for. In her office, Alara watched the press conference stream on her laptop, her stomach in knots. Her team was silent, their faces a mixture of anger and concern. Her phone buzzed. It was Jinwoo. His voice was calm, a steady anchor in her sea of anxiety. "He has made his move," he said simply. "He's lying to the entire world," she said, her voice tight with fury. "I know," Jinwoo replied. Do not release a statement. Do not speak to the press. Do not do anything. Miss Choi will be sending a car for you at 8 a.m. tomorrow. There is a press conference for the Obsidian Fund's annual city grant. You and I will be attending." "What? Why? Shouldn't we be meeting with the lawyers?" "The lawyers have already done their work," he said. "Tomorrow is not a legal proceeding. It is a conclusion." There was a chilling finality in his tone. "Wear the dress I sent over, the blue one. It is a good color on you." Before she could ask anything else, he had hung up. She was left staring at the phone, her fear warring with a reluctant trust in his cryptic plan. He was moving pieces on a board she couldn't see, and she had no choice but to trust that he was playing for her side. The next morning, she put on the dress. It was an architectural marvel in itself, a deep sapphire blue that was both severe and feminine. It was a power dress. As she was driven through the city, she saw Marcus's face on news screens, his accusations replayed over and over. A cold dread settled in her stomach. The press conference was being held in the main atrium of a modern art museum. The room was packed. This was a major event in the city's philanthropic calendar, attended by every major player in business, politics, and media. As Alara entered the room at Jinwoo's side, a hush fell. Every eye turned to them. The air crackled with tension and whispered speculation. She felt like a gladiator walking into the arena. Jinwoo guided her to the front row, to 2 reserved seats. And then she saw him. Marcus. He was sitting on the dais at the main table, next to the chairman of the Obsidian Fund. He was one of the grant's presenters. Of course. It was the perfect stage for him, a chance to project power and stability even as his world was crumbling. When he saw her, his eyes widened in shock and then narrowed in triumph. He thought she had come to confront him, to make a scene. He saw it as a sign of her desperation. He gave her a small, smug smirk from across the room. He was a fool, playing checkers while his opponent was mastering Go. The conference began, speeches were made, grants were announced. Then it was Marcus's turn to speak. He strode to the podium, radiating a false confidence that was painful to watch. He spoke about civic duty, about corporate responsibility, about fostering new talent. It was all a performance. Then he went off script. "Speaking of talent," he said, his eyes finding Alara in the front row, "it is a sad day when that trust is betrayed." A murmur went through the crowd. There are some in this very room who have built their new, undeserved success on a foundation of lies and theft. He pointed a finger directly at her. "She doesn't belong here. She doesn't belong at a table with honorable people. She is a thief, and I will prove it." Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras flashed, all of them pointed at Alara. She felt the heat of 100 stares, the weight of 1,000 judgments. Her blood ran cold. This was it, public ruin. But before she could react, before the first tier of humiliation could fall, Jin-Woo Kwon stood up. He did not move quickly. He rose to his feet with a deliberate, unhurried grace that commanded immediate attention. The room fell silent. Even Marcus, caught mid-rant, faltered at the podium, staring at the man who was now the undisputed center of gravity in the room. Jin-Woo did not look at Marcus. He turned and faced the audience, the press, the city's elite. His face was a mask of cold, quiet fury. "My name is Jin-Woo Kwon," he began, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the silent atrium. He needed no microphone. "I am the chairman of Kwon Industries, and it seems there has been a significant misunderstanding that I feel compelled to correct." He turned his head slowly, his gaze finally landing on Marcus, who visibly shrank under the weight of it. "Mr. Thorne speaks of theft," Jin-Woo said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Let us talk about theft." He gestured to Miss Choi, who was standing nearby. She stepped forward and handed him a tablet. Jin-Woo tapped the screen, and the massive digital display behind the podium, which had been showing the Obsidian Fund's logo, flickered and changed. An image appeared. the official acquisition document signed and dated that very morning, showing that Thorne Development Group was now a wholly owned, debt-leveraged subsidiary of Kwan Industries. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Marcus stared at the screen, his face draining of all color. What? What is this? This is impossible. Is it? Jinwoo asked, his voice dangerously soft. For the past 6 months, my company has been quietly acquiring your debt, all of it. The loans for your past projects, the financing for your future ones, the mortgage on your office building. As of 9 a.m. this morning, I own you, Mr. Thorne. Your company, your assets, your future. You are my employee now, and your first act as my employee will be to stand there and listen. The screen changed again. It now showed a split view. On one side was a blueprint for the Vesper Tower dated 2 years ago, with Thorne Development in the title block. On the other side was a hand-drawn sketch, a delicate, beautiful rendering of the tower's initial concept. The camera zoomed in on the bottom corner of the sketch, to a date from 6 years ago, and a signature, E. Vance. The screen changed again. A flurry of documents, server logs, emails with timestamps, forensic data analysis reports. An irrefutable digital timeline that showed every single design file for the Vesper Tower had originated on Alara Vance's personal workstation years before Marcus had ever announced the project. It showed how the files were transferred to the company server and systematically relabeled. It was a cold digital autopsy of a grand theft. Mr. Thorne did not design the Vesper Tower, Jinwoo announced to the silent, stunned room. He stole it. He stole it from the brilliant woman sitting right here. He took her genius, put his name on it, and built his career on her back. He speaks of betrayal. This is betrayal. He speaks of theft. This is theft. Every eye in the room was now on Marcus. Not with speculation, but with dawning horror and contempt. His mask of confidence had not just cracked. It had disintegrated. His face was a mess of sweat and disbelief. He looked like a man who had just watched his own ghost walk through a wall. And so, Jinwoo continued, his voice the calm, steady toll of a funeral bell. As the new owner of Thorne Development, my first official act is to terminate your employment for cause. My second act is to file a criminal complaint against you for fraud and a civil suit for the recovery of all profits derived from that fraud. My lawyers are filing the paperwork as we speak. You will be hearing from them. You will also be hearing from the district attorney. He paused, letting the full weight of the ruin settle on Marcus's shoulders. You came here today to destroy a good person's reputation. Instead, you have merely announced the end of your own. You are finished, Mr. Thorne. In this city, you are nothing. The finality of it was absolute. Marcus opened his mouth, but only a choked, gurgling sound came out. His legs gave way. He dropped to his knees behind the podium, his head in his hands, and began to sob. Not quiet, dignified tears, but wrenching, gasping, animal sounds of a man whose entire world had been publicly and irrevocably dismantled in the space of 5 minutes. The room was frozen in a state of shocked silence, the only sound Marcus's pathetic weeping and the frantic clicking of 100 cameras capturing his complete and utter downfall. Jinwoo Kwan looked at the pathetic figure on the floor for a long moment, his expression devoid of any triumph. It was not a look of victory. It was a look of distaste, as if he were observing a piece of garbage being swept away. He did not waste another glance on him. Then he turned back to the audience. He walked over to Alara, who was still seated, her hands clasped in her lap, her face pale but her eyes clear. She was watching the culmination of a justice she had never thought she would see. He held out his hand to her. She took it. His hand was warm and steady. She rose to her feet, the sapphire dress shimmering under the lights. Jinwoo led her to the podium, stepping around the crumpled, sobbing form of Marcus Thorne as if he were a piece of discarded trash. Jinwoo's security team appeared, discreetly and efficiently lifting Marcus to his feet and escorting him from the room, his cries echoing down the marble hall until they were gone. Jinwoo turned back to the microphone, his arm resting lightly, protectively, on Alara's back. "Now that the unpleasantness is concluded," he said, his voice returning to its normal, calm register, "allow me to correct the record permanently. The genius behind the Vesper Tower stands before you, but that building is her past. I am more interested in the future." He looked at Alara, a deep, profound respect in his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press, members of the Obsidian Fund, I would like to formally introduce the lead architect, chief designer, and visionary behind the Keystone Initiative, Miss Alara Vance." He stepped back, leaving her alone at the podium, alone in the spotlight. But this time, the light wasn't an invasive, exposing glare. It was a warm, validating embrace. The silence stretched for a heartbeat, and then a single person began to clap, then another and another, until the entire atrium was filled with a thunderous, rolling wave of applause. It was not applause for a ghost, or an accessory, or a victim. It was for her talent, for her resilience, for her name. A smile touched Alara's lips, a real one that reached her eyes and made them shine. She looked out at the sea of faces, and she did not feel fear or exhaustion. She felt a slow, steady, and unfamiliar peace settle over her. The kind of peace that comes after a long, brutal war has finally been won. Later that evening, they stood on the terrace of her loft. The city glittered below them, a vast and endless field of diamonds. The air was cool and clean. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The silence between them was no longer a space to be filled, but a comfort to be shared. "He's been arrested," Jinwoo said finally, his voice quiet. "The DA is fast-tracking the fraud charges. He'll lose his license. He'll lose everything." Alara nodded, leaning against the railing. She felt a strange absence of feeling about it. Not joy, not pity, not even satisfaction. Just quiet. The noise that Marcus had occupied in her head for so long was finally gone. There was only stillness. "Thank you," she said, turning to face him. "For everything. For seeing me." "I only saw what was already there," he replied, his gaze soft. "You are the most capable person I have ever met, Alara. You were the most capable person in every room you were ever in with him. He was not the sun. He was a cheap mirror, trying to reflect your light." She finally understood the nature of his power. It wasn't the loud, performative power of a man like Marcus. It was the deep, quiet, structural power of a man who builds things, companies, buildings, futures. And a man who, when necessary, could just as easily dismantle them. He stepped closer, and the space between them seemed to hum with a new energy. It wasn't the fiery, chaotic passion she had once mistaken for love with Marcus. It was something steadier, deeper. It was recognition. It was safety. "The Keystone Initiative," she said, her voice a little breathless. "The canvas you offered me. It is still yours," he affirmed. "Build whatever you want. I will be there to watch." "I don't want you to just watch," she said, finding a new boldness in herself. "I want you to build it with me, as a partner." A slow smile spread across his face, the one that reached his eyes and hinted at the warmth he kept so carefully guarded. "I thought you'd never ask." He didn't kiss her. He simply reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. It was a gesture of profound intimacy, a promise of a shared future. They stood there together, hand in hand, looking out at the city skyline. At the Vesper Tower, a monument to her past endurance, and at the empty space where the Keystone Initiative would soon rise, a testament to her future. The weight in her bones, the quiet exhaustion she had carried for so long, was gone. It had been replaced by a different kind of weight, the solid, grounding weight of a hand holding hers. The feeling of being correctly placed in the world, of standing on a foundation she had built herself, next to a man who saw its true worth. It was not a fairy tale ending. It was something far better. It was a beginning, earned and true.